Hi, everybody. So I only read for three Pomodoros today, but that'll hopefully make things go a tad more quickly. The three things I read are 8 pages of The New Science of the Enchanted World by Marshall Solins, the first 10 pages of The Fifth Hammer by Daniel Heller Rosen, and the middle of a paper called Peirce, Wittgenstein, and Systematic Philosophy by Renford Ranbrough. Let's get started. So The New Science of the Enchanted World is a book about disabusing the field of anthropology of its transcendentalist assumptions and moving towards more immanentalist approaches. The basic thesis of the book is that despite the transcendental monotheism so common in the Western world, the vast majority of humanity exists in a substantially different spiritual milieu. He calls the spirits that are commonplace amongst most cultures metapersons, and he insists on the empirical nature of these cultures' spiritual techniques. About this, Solon says, ironically, the soul in immanentist societies is guaranteed the perpetual life that the soul of transcendental orders only aspires to and may well fail to achieve. The section that I read today began with the use and power of names and the relation of souls to alliances and filiations. He talks about the Arctic explorer Nud Rasmussen, who points out that among the Netsilik Inuit, to every name is attached a certain store of power that is transferred to those who bear the name. It is as if a name had its own particular soul, acting quite independently of the body's soul. According to some people, this means that the soul of the body, the real fountain of life, is the one that makes mankind human, while the soul of the name merely makes it generally strong, keeps it up, and protects it. He describes how multiple names are taken and invoked in a different circumstance. The dichotomy between the soul of the name and the soul of the body is reflected in a common finding that the soul of ancestral derivation is distinguished from the personal soul. The former is seen as the stronger. He writes, the body's powers are the means by which living individuals realize, to a greater or lesser extent, the vital potencies of the ancestral soul. And the body itself is marked by filiation. The Bakongo of Lower Zaire split the body at the navel. According to the anthropologist Wyatt McGaffey, who writes, the upper part, including the head, is of paternal origin and accordingly the site of the masculine attributes of intelligence, perception, authority, and rigor. The lower part of maternal origin is associated with organic functions, sexuality, emotion, and other feminine attributes regarded by men as powerful, obscure, and disorderly. He further comments that some Congo psychologists agree with Freud that the secrets of the ancestors come from below the navel and emerge above it as wisdom. This section goes into a bit more detail than I'm covering here, but I'll leave it at that for now and move on to the next book. All right, so The Fifth Hammer is a book I've been sitting on for a while, and I figured that if I'm going to talk about the stuff I'm reading, I might as well go for it. The cover is taken from an anonymous 11th century illustration titled The Pythagorean Forge, related to the possibly apocryphal story with which the book begins. The story comes by way of Boethius. Pythagoras distrusted the ears and the variability and inconstancy of musical instruments and determined to liberate himself by studying the laws of sound without needing to encounter them physically. One day, however, as if by a kind of divine will, he found himself wandering into a forge where he heard many hammers emitting a single consonance and became astonished. He tried a few things like having the blacksmiths exchange their hammers, very surprised by the invariance of the consonant sound, which must have been found in the hammer's many sensible qualities, particularly their weight. Afterwards, he set out to derive the theory of acoustic ratios with strings and pipes. Heller Rosen writes, suddenly, the seemingly endless diversity of sounds acquired a new simplicity. Acoustical intervals were now expressible as arithmetical relations. The proof lay in the reduction of the sound of the octave to the relation of 2 to 1, that of the fifth to the relation of 3 to 2, that of the fourth to the relation of 4 to 3. In short, the natural world could be transcribed, not, to be sure, by the letters of alphabets, which differ among themselves according to the variety of human idioms, but by those various collections of unity that the ancients understood to be numbers. The arithmetical doctrine that Pythagoras developed came from the four respective weights of the hammers and consonants, 12, 9, 8, and 6, and the numbers of a cosmological fourfold called the tetractys. But Boethius observes there happened to be 5 hammers, saying that it was discarded because it was discordant. The presence of the fifth hammer, Heller Rosen writes, seems to belie the totality of the set of 4. For the early readers of Boethius, he writes, its discordant sound may have testified to the limits of the sublunary sphere, where natural science, even in its most developed forms, could predict no physical event with certainty. It only takes one hammer to ruin the consonants of the other 4. This relationship of consonance to discordance makes up the theme of the rest of the book. So that's all I'll say about that. Let's talk about that paper. Peirce, Wittgenstein and Systematic Philosophy by Renford Bambro is something that I found while pondering the similarities between the late Wittgenstein and late pragmatism, particularly Charles Sanders Peirce, and how odd it is that Wittgenstein is so much more well-known and this connection seems to not be talked about too much, or at least I thought. I was asking myself, is this in my imagination? And if it isn't, what are the similarities and what are the differences? So Bambro's perspective is that the similarities are considerable, so considerable, in fact, that if we didn't know any better, we might find a kinship such as we might expect if we knew that one had been the close disciple of the other. Incidentally, the nature of this influence on Wittgenstein is explored at length by Cheryl Missack in the book Cambridge Pragmatism, and it's said to have come by way of the British mathematician and philosopher Frank Ramsey, which this paper also mentions. The part I read, however, was about exploring not their commonalities, but their major difference, which is that Peirce was a self-avowed system builder who saw a reproducible science to be the proper aim of philosophy, whereas Wittgenstein wrote in fragments and utterly disavowed any such capacity or legitimate ambition for philosophy. I found Bambro's speculation about this difference to be deeply interesting. Bambro writes that Wittgenstein's main concern was to dispel any illusion that philosophical inquiry was a kind of causal inquiry or a physics of the abstract. And Peirce's idea on the matter were substantially more broad than this. In addition to pointing out that for Peirce, every rational method is a scientific method, including those of philosophy, he writes, in comparing and contrasting these two philosophers, we must notice that Wittgenstein uses grammar widely and science narrowly, that Peirce uses science and experience and observation and perception so widely that his voice sometimes seems to be the voice of Russell when the thoughts he thinks are nearer to the thoughts of Wittgenstein. The conclusion he makes is that being a protege of Bertrand Russell, Wittgenstein's main idea of what a scientific philosophy could be came directly from Russell, and he didn't much like it. In closing, something I thought might be worth mentioning is that this paper identifies both Wittgenstein and Peirce as naturalists in epistemology and defines what that means. On the one hand, Wittgenstein describes a kind of certainty that continually struggles and makes it out to be a form of life, something that lies beyond justified or unjustified, something animal, just as Peirce conceives of perceptive judgments as something beyond ratiocination and more in the realm of instinct, beyond our senses, but no less a part of our animality. He writes, they regard a man's thinking and inquiring, asking and answering, assessing and denying, believing, doubting, and explaining as actions and reactions of a creature whose actions and reactions can be observed and described and understood in spite of its bewildering familiarity to the only observers qualified to undertake the task. I hope you found these explorations amusing. Please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave any thoughts or comments in the comments section. Until next time.